steadily it rises. Public preference for Lincoln Continental as the symbol for today's luxury motoring.
Hey, it's Jason ODB, the Lincoln Addict, and we're going to go over part 2 of this series. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so. You can always go back and watch part 1. But in this part 2, I'm covering my Project Smuggler's Blues, my 64 Lincoln Continental Convertible. But in this episode, I'm going to go over my choice of airbags, including the bags I've had the best experience with in the past, kind of the evolution of air management, my choice for air management, compressors, and the tank. I'll also give a sneak peek of how Project Smuggler's Blues is coming along. I dropped it off last weekend in Edgewater, Florida, outside Daytona, and my buddies kind of held any updates close to the vest. Now, as I said a moment ago, if you get a chance, please check out my channel here. There's a lot of Lincoln content, including Lincoln Land, shout out to them, and Clearwater, kind of a quick shop tour in the past. You can always go back and watch those videos and check out Lincoln Addict podcast, however you listen to podcasts. So the key aspect, or one key component rather, to an airbagged car or truck is going to be the type of bags that you choose. Typically, an install shop is going to recommend what they're used to installing or what they have found that is going to be best for their customers. So Universal Air is the bag that I chose, and that's based upon Jeff is a big believer in this brand. He has found that it's worked really, really well, and arguably his shop probably has bagged possibly the most Lincolns out there over the years. But if you look here, airbags are like tires. There are many different options. Now, I've owned several bagged vehicles over the years, and each of them kind of had a different setup. I had the best experience with Conitec bags and Universal Air bags. So my wife's 09 Dodge Charger that we bagged years ago we ended up taking like an older kit that we had gotten and drove on for a while, and then I upgraded it to Universal Air, and the bags were always fantastic. So they rode good and they lasted, so that was a great thing. Now, there was the guy that installed the rear setup, there was a little bit of rubbing going on, and I did have to eventually replace one of those bags, but that was because of the install, and we never had an issue after we kind of remedied that, which was fantastic. Now, Devious sells their kits. If you look on their website like we did in the last video, you'll see I kind of mentioned the bags that they include are the Universal Air. If I recall correctly, talking to Jeff in the past, they have found that they were the best riding bags, and he kind of came across those, obviously, over the years, laying these cars out. Overall, Devious has bagged, again, countless 60s Lincolns. I've also talked with Universal Air. I try to stop by their booth any year that I go to SEMA, and I always chat with those guys. They're good people. Whenever I call there, typically stuff goes out the same day. And they're just they're really focused on quality, so that's good stuff. If we click this link here, this is just an example. So this is Universal Air's website. Off the top of my head, I don't recall what bags Jeff includes in the kit, but I believe they're one of these two. They're, of course, not these, so it would either be these or these. But you could see either 89 or 125 a bag, not too bad. And I do believe it's, again, probably these that Jeff includes. You can certainly go with whatever bag that you decide upon, but my suggestion to you, wherever you're at, if you're going to have someone install the kit, talk to those shops and say, hey, what do you recommend? My buddy Jimmy that's doing my install, he's airbagged over the past 25 plus years, tons of vehicles, cars, trucks. He's also built custom chassis and things like that. Those are the type of people that you want to kind of get in their ear and ask them a few questions like, hey, I'm going to lay my Lincoln out. I'm going to be cruising this thing. My family, friends are going to be in it. Want to make sure that I got the best bag. I don't want to be left on the side of the highway. What do you recommend, right? So they're going to recommend something. So then talk to some other people. Go on Facebook groups. Some of these groups like Suicide Slabs and Lincoln Addict and things like that. Ask the different owners, hey, what have you had the best experience with? So that's my feedback there. Now, just talking about airbags in general, this was my 95 Suburban, and I loved this truck, SUV, whatever you want to call it. I put anywhere from, I'm just estimating 100 or 80 to 100,000 miles while this truck was bagged. I had Conitec bags on it, and I had zero issues. Not once did I ever have a problem with this system, and it was fantastic. It was super reliable. I did inspect the bags every so often, so I would get under, every so often I might, just jack the front up and kind of check things out. There were a couple times, I think one in particular, where I pulled off the control arms. I took them to the local place. I had all new bushings pressed in. Those factory bushings were kind of squeaky and things like that. So I did perform routine maintenance on this the best that I could at the time. Huge shout out to my friend Matt Torgerson from the shop. That was his business for many, many years, and he did the install on this thing, and it was flawless. Next, let's talk about the evolution of air management. I thought this would be just a quick, important topic to hit upon before I talk about the choice that I went with and why. If you think about air suspension, again, I mentioned in the series or video 1, if you think about that, air suspension's been around a long, long time, way longer than you've ever even imagined, going back to Greyhound buses, of course, big rigs, things like that. But basically in the 90s, Brian Gendro at the Chop Shop in Southern California ends up putting airbags on a mini truck, and kind of things were forever changed at that point. Guys were using air shocks and whatnot, but there's been a huge evolution of air management. So the basic thing that many folks started out with, including myself, was a dual or single gauge. So this is a dual gauge, and with paddle valves. So I mentioned in the first video with Tony Boss Boland's 65 Lincoln Continental, he just has this base. This is what I call a basic setup, and this works flawlessly. You can go to shops and you can buy this setup. I know Boris at Street Machinery still highly recommends this, and you basically have on the back of these valves, this would be like up left, front left, front right, rear left, rear right, as an example. And what would happen is your airlines would run all the way up to the back of these, and they're kind of like what I believe they refer to as a barb fitting, and you push those airlines on there. It's kind of a pain to push them all the way on, but once you do, typically these setups here are going to have what I believe they're still using are quarter inch lines. So typically, if you have one of these setups, you're going to have a little bit slower system. So if you pull up to a show and you want to air out your system, it's going to be like, shh. It's going to take just a little bit for it to air down, not a super long time. But you're going to find that they are super reliable, especially with the quarter inch lines. For whatever reason, you just kind of end up running that stuff, and you don't really have many leaks, right? With Tony's car, I think over the course of time, he had one leak, and it was a bad T-finning, which was replaced, and then boom, for the most part, his has been solid. But you can still get these setups. In my Suburban, I want to go back here. You can't really see it, but this was my setup I had a long time. This was actually a one single gauge, which was what they refer to as a dual needle gauge. So you have like basically your pressure for the front. So you have a line these two lines here are teed into your system, and you have the pressure for the front and you have the pressure for the rear. So when you get in the vehicle, you would put like maybe the white needle up to 80 pounds and the rear needle up to 40 pounds or whatever it needed, based upon where you had that vehicle aligned. Now, you can't really see it here. It's kind of hard, but the two switches that I had, those were actually for electric valves. We'll talk about those in a moment. But basically, I was able to, hit this, this would be the front up and the front down, rear up, rear down, and it's a very reliable system. So what I was using there was a combination of this gauge and our next item, which is the electric air valve. So with these valves, people still use these all the time. They swear by them. My friend Tom Bennett, shout out to Tom, he's building a really awesome F100 unibody right now. And if you look at some of his reels on Instagram, you'll see that he's using these valves, same similar valve that he used on his 65 Lincoln that he still owns. just super reliable. If you end up having an issue with these, you can, just replace one or take it apart and kind of rebuild it with new diaphragms or O-rings, whatever they need. These setups, you just got basically a power and ground. And typically, guys will run maybe 4 of these, right? So you can have 2 for the front, 2 for the rear. That'll let your system go a little bit quicker. So when you're airing it out, it's like, boom, quick. You're typically going to have a 3/8 line, which that's a little different because over here you're going to have typically a 1/4-inch line. So these valves you can find, I'd imagine there may be $50 a piece, give or take. And the leading brand out there is SMC. I recently had to replace, what was it, 8 valves on my 94S10. The ones I had on there were super old, and Jimmy's Running Customs went back about 2 years ago, and they replaced all of them because they were leaky. So what was happening is the truck was leaking up as soon as the tank started to fill up, and it was because, the diaphragms and stuff inside were bad. But, typically these are going to last you a long time, and they are rebuildable. Now, from there, the last item I'm going to talk about is a newer style manifold. So years ago, you start having guys go, okay, well, we went from this, we went over to electric valves, and in between, there's a lot of other things. So don't get me wrong. I mean, in the early 2000s, there were some pretty big setups, especially from Airlift and some of those companies that, maybe weren't as nice and clean as setups are today. But again, that was kind of the evolution. Well, now where we're at is you have leading brands like AccuAir that have this manifold. You typically are going to have your four airlines, going out to each bag, and basically your valves in here, basically these are your valves right here. So you got 8 of them, and they're kind of built into this manifold so that when you hit the switch, the front of the car goes up, the rear goes up. Or in this case, they've got what they call levelers or an E-level system, and the little computer, if you will, manages a lot of that. So when you start the car goes up to, let's say, your number 2 setting, which is your drive height, where you had the car aligned, and boom, you drive off. There's no messing with, okay, let me put this up to 80, let me put the other one up to 40, and things like that. So AccuAir manifold paired with an ECU and touchpad is really kind of where we're at now. Again, there are some other leading brands out there. This is the one I so choose to go with. These guys are now in Florida. They're over kind of on the northeast coast of Florida, and they were repurchased by Arnott, which is a company that's been in the air suspension market for a very long time. And that was after AccuAir went out of business. So they did go out of business for whatever reason, and they are back, and they're better than ever. So speaking of AccuAir, air management, adjustability, and auto leveling. So let's go over this now. So again, the industry, as you can see, has come a long way in terms of air management. Leading brands offer ease of use and auto leveling, which I could have never really foresaw going back to the late 90s when I really started getting into this. I think my first truck was bagged in 98. When companies like AccuAir, when they start offering these different products, the ease of use is there because you can just plug and play, so to speak, for the most part. You can start with the basic kit, which is great. I think I mentioned this in the first video, and work your way up, or you can come out of the gate with the full kit. Again, AccuAir is great as they provide you with options. Let's take a look at those now. Their website's been all redone, and what you're going to see is when you hover over these items, there's a lot of different stuff, right? They even have where you can submit photos of your vehicle to get featured, which is kind of cool. But I want to focus here. If we go to products, you got starter, premium, and ultimate. So if we go with the starter kit, what you're going to look at is you are going to see the VU4 manifold. You can see some of the pricing here. You've got a tank, and you've got your compressors, and you have your ECU plus, okay? So with this setup, it allows for you to utilize your phone to adjust. Yes, believe it or not, you utilize your phone to to control the system, which is kind of cool. You can go down here and you can see all the different stuff. And then one good thing that they do is they label like, well, what, like, hey, Jason or AccuAir, what would be the available add-ons? So they're telling you here the Touchpad Plus, height sensors, fitting kit airlines, and then if you wanted to go with bigger compressors. You can see here they do have kind of these smaller compressors, which might be fine for your project. It really just depends. Now, this does say 485C dual pack, so I do believe those are the biggest compressors, but we'll take a look here. So basically, you can see with AccuAir, about $2,400 starting with that package. Then you go to the premium. It's like, okay, well, what does the premium offer? For several $100s more, the one thing that's going to stick out is right here on the screen. Those are the sensors that go on each corner. They have to be professionally installed unless you are someone that can kind of know your way around installing this type of stuff. And that is what is going to tell the computer where the height of the vehicle is at. So again, you can walk out of a restaurant, you can take out your phone, iPhone or Android, you can open the AccuAir app, and then you can press, and then boom, your car's going to level up. Or you can set it when you get in the car and you start the car, it automatically goes to that preset, which is fantastic. The other cool thing is you can change some of the settings in the phone app if you have, and if you look on the screen here, that little puck, if you will, that's the ECU Plus. So that's the brains of the operation. So if you want to change that backlight color, you can do all of that right there in the app, which is totally awesome. You can also adjust a few other settings, whether you want to have your system at like 200 PSI and just different things like that. There's a couple of settings in there. And then in the lower left, it's real hard to see if you look at that that iPhone looking device there, the lower left, that shows you the PSI. So I do believe if you have the AccuAir pressure switch plugged in, I do believe the PSI of the tank will display there, which is kind of a cool thing. You may say, hey, well, why do I want to, know that? You could look and see like, okay, well, if your tank is leaking, you could look to see like, oh, wow, well, my tank's showing only 120 PSI, and it would maybe indicate to you that there's a leak somewhere. So there's a couple, just tidbits there for you. But you go down here and you kind of look and see what's included. The big thing that is sticking out to me is the touchpad. Okay, so when they display here, although you see the ECU Plus right here, it looks like a phone, right, Android style device, right? What you're getting with this kit is you're not getting the touchpad. So you'll see often with featured vehicles or vehicles at car shows, they have a touchpad sitting on their seat, or there's a hidden little thing that they have under the dash, which displays, or maybe the touchpad's mounted on the dash somewhere. Okay, you'll see all different configurations. The key there is these kits, to save a little bit of money, instead of you adding the extra expense to use the touchpad, you're actually using your phone to control the system. Now, if you go here to the Ultimate, what you're going to find is not only are you going to be able to control with your phone, you're also going to have the touchpad. You can kind of see that there. The touchpad is one of, I think, users, including myself, it's one of their favorite aspects of this, because it's really what you interact with. So when you're on your cruise, or you're riding through the parking lot where the car show's at, you can easily have that controller, let's say, in your right hand. And the way it's set up, you can kind of feel the little bumps in it and things like that, where the 1, 2, and 3 are. So like, let's say you want to cruise really low and you hit number 1. Now you're down at that low, that low drop, and you're kind of cruising, so to speak. So again, it's got like almost like a, I don't want to say tactile feel, but it's got a nice feel to this controller, and I think that's why a lot of people continue to use AccuAir. So those are a couple of different things and some of the differences between the systems, but you can see here from that original price, let's say that's $3,500. Here you're at $2,400, so give or take $1,100, you can kind of get the ultimate in terms of all of this. Now, again, down here, it doesn't say the available add-on. It doesn't mention the compressors. So you would want to just make sure that this is going to include everything, because here it says ViAir 485C dual pack stealth black, and then available add-ons 485. Okay, I think what it Yeah. Okay. So that this might just need to be removed. I'm not sure, but it does appear the premium pack does include the ViAir compressors, which is key. We'll go back here really quick to the starter, and this says dual pack. Okay, so this should also come with the dual pack. I like the Stealth Black because living in Florida with the condensation and the dew and things like that, the Platinum, which I refer to as Chrome, their version of those, they will sometimes kind of get a little bit of surface rust on them. All righty. So as we wind this down, I did want to also just hit on, we're talking about AccuAir. You saw there ViAir over and over and over again. Really, ViAir is the only name, in my opinion, in the air compressor market. These guys have been around a long time, and they've done such a good job that for 20 years, they really didn't even have to change their product. A couple of years ago, around their 20th anniversary, they came out with like their second-gen compressor, which was cool. They're even more efficient. They have this new, what they refer to, head on here. They're quicker, they're a little bit quieter, and then they also have a new compressor that's even ultra quiet. So, typically if you've been around mini trucks or air suspension, you're going to hear that little bit of noise, if you will, kicking on in your car when the compressors kick on. But like with these 485s that I purchased for my 64, man, they're super quick. And I don't mind if they're on for 30 seconds or a minute, filling that tank up. So just to be clear, if you don't know, like when you're lifting the vehicle up, you're utilizing the air that's in your tank, and when that has to be replenished. So there's a pressure switch built in. You don't have to hit anything. As soon as it gets to a certain percentage or a certain PSI, the compressors are going to kick on, fill the tank back up to, let's say, 200 PSI, and then boom. If you're out cruising the boulevard or you're leaving the car show and you got to air your car up, again, you jump in the car, you either start it. If you have that feature turned on, it's going to go up to number 2 on the height deal. You can also have it where you start your car, then you hit number 2 on the touchpad, or you can utilize the app, whether before you even get in the vehicle or once you sit down in it, you can just press it and then boom, the car's going to go up to that level. Now, this was the first time a couple years ago, I believe, that they offered the Stealth Black, and I thought that was a nice touch. And you can see here kind of don't pay attention to the mess. This is a photo I took a few months ago of the ViAir Gen 2 dual 485C Stealth Black, 200 PSI compressors, 100% duty, and it's like 3.82 CFM. Okay, the last thing I'm going to touch upon before I show you guys a sneak peek is the air management. So tanks are almost like bags or tires. Like I said earlier, there's a ton of options out there, including AccuAir. So we saw on their website, they actually give you a tank, which is super cool. They have a tank like this that you can utilize the VU4, or they actually have a VT, which is a valve tank, where the valves for your air system are actually inside this tank, which is kind of crazy. But if we go back here and we look at what I went with, I chose to go with Universal Air. I've always liked their bags. I've always liked their products. This is a stock photo that actually shows a competitor manifold. Mine will have the AccuAir, of course, with the compressors. But the reason why I like this tank is it's a modular tank. So these mounts here, these are the feet for the tank, and you have these 5 bars around the tank. And the way they manufacture these built aluminum mounts is you can clock things any which way you want them based upon your configuration or what you want. Or hell, if you're a do-it-yourselfer, you could once a year go out there and change your system, move things around and whatnot. Originally, mine was going to have the compressors kind of maybe mounted towards the back here, the ECU, and then the VU4, which is the AccuAir manifold. So we'll look at the sneak peek photos here in a minute. I went with Universal Air Tank setup after seeing their products at SEMA a few years back. This allows, again, for the different mounts, the different configurations for the ECU Plus, which is the AccuAir brain, the VU4, which is their manifold we looked at, and the ViAir compressors in any configuration you can come up with. All the brackets are made out of built aluminum. Now, the feet, as I mentioned, they're also mounted, or they're also provided, and those are a little bit bigger size than the other mounts here. if I recall correctly. Now, I ordered these parts through CNS Metalworks after speaking with Chris, so I want to give a huge shout out to Chris. It's cs-metalworks.com. He's a good dude out in California. I visited his shop recently, and I appreciate that. Now, in closing, I would say more than one tank may be necessary based upon your setup. Jimmy kind of always tells me, hey, you got to kind of bag it, see how it's going to do. Jeff has even told me that. He goes, you can have one tank and you can get away with it. But he goes, having two tanks is really the icing on the cake. And with these big cars, especially if it's a Lincoln or in my case, a Lincoln, and other, cases, Cadillacs, right? They're big boats of cars, a lot of weight, and it does help to maybe have two tanks, right? So you have a little bit more air, and then that's going to allow for the car easily to come up. And then if you're kind of hitting the switches, you're cruising down the block, and you're going down, up and down, it's going to allow for you to have a little bit more reservoir, if you will, of air. Okay, Smuggler's Blues, here's the sneak peek before I wind this down. Jimmy's been working on my car. I dropped it off last Saturday at the time of this recording. It's the following Sunday, and I was going to be picking the car up today, but they did need a few more days to finish they're actually doing the exhaust as well, which is awesome. I'll have a brand new exhaust from the headers back. But with this setup, what you could see, one change that he made, and I knew Jimmy would do this, and I appreciate him doing it, is this mount here for the AccuAir, for the Universal Air modular tank. He only utilized these two mounts. That's it. And instead of having the compressors on the backside like I maybe was envisioning, and then having the ECU Plus maybe on top and the VU4 right here, I appreciate his professionalism to say, hey, this is going to work a little bit better, and it's going to fit in here even better, and it's going to allow for you to have the room if you need to add an extra tank over here. So that's what he did. So I've got the 485s here. He mounted the VU4. There's actually, the ECU Plus from AccuAir. There's a couple of holes underneath this that allows you to easily mount it. The VU4, this is the manifold, right? So when you're hitting the switches, this is what's releasing the air from the bags or adding air to the bags. He always goes with these real nice fittings. So this is out of the top of the VU4. He tied in the pressure switch right here. Again, that's what's going to read on the phone app to show you the PSI. And then the compressors, they come with what we refer to as these leader lines or leader hoses. And boom, you can see you have to have those mounted for the most part close to your tank because you want it to fill the tank, but also look how long the leader lines are. Of course, these fittings he had to add in, and boom. From there, I'm anxious to kind of see how the rest of it's going to look. You can see up here, he has these 4 lines. I really love utilizing those bulkhead fittings. That allows for you to kind of have a good connection on the inside and outside of this metal piece here. So he's going to hardline. We'll have to see how he does it. He's really good with the stainless. He'll hardline the lines here. And then these on the other side will go out. Those steel braided air lines or nylon lines will go to each bag. And that's what's going to fill or deflate as you hit the switch. In addition to that, you can see kind of where the wiring is here. You can't see really back here, but Jimmy, likes to make a setup for the relays and some of the wiring. So that would be kind of underneath and on the back side of the tank here. We see these fittings here that he's added. So that'll kind of tie in, and I'll kind of show you guys a little bit more once we get to that point. But basically, this is going to fill the tank, and then the air that's going to come out of it to the manifold to raise the car up are going to come right here from these sources. So it kind of ties into this block or this manifold, if you will, which VU4 is the name of it. So you can see the little bit of a bend that he did here. So this would have come down straight. You'd have about a 90 right here, and then that follows the floor nicely right up and kind of matches the floor. So you can see how it all kind of bolts in there. I appreciate you guys sticking with me. And again, I would ask if you can, please subscribe to the channel. If you like what we're doing here, leave a comment. It really helps me out. And then the last thing I'll say is this. I do have a few more episodes. We'll talk about fittings. We'll talk about wheels, tires. We'll talk about relays, some miscellaneous things that you may not think about when you're doing a setup. Again, these are all things you got to plan for or be ready to pay for in terms of the overall cost for having someone install this system. Take care, stay on the rise, and appreciate you guys. Peace.